James Melendez. Thank you for joining me today. James, all about business. This topic is very important to me, and I think it's important to a lot of people. Increasing resilience, so keeping steady and never letting things derail you. Stay tuned, and I'll tell you about my thoughts, perspectives, and my own experience in this area. Stay tuned. So every organization, in my opinion, should be teaching coursework in increasing resiliency. Now, this is something that can be beneficial. It can help out an organization and help individual contributors, managers, and so forth to really acquire the capabilities of increasing resilience. I think it could be a course offering in a learning management system, something on demand for each individual contributor. Or it could be a special series, maybe by a health and well-being organization within a company or nonprofit or governmental organization to help out employees and to really give them the tools to really be responsive and also to make them more successful. It's also helping organizations in terms of each of the employees helping each other out to understand perhaps their avenue or their path point and how they can help each other be more successful in every aspect that they're in as well. To engage people and to help people who might be lower on the building resiliency curve. It's very important to help increase resiliency and not less. Just because you have some doesn't mean that perhaps previous times in your life you've actually had more and you've actually decreased just a bit, and it's really hard to get back to that position, to that place, to that point. And I think there's a way of getting there. There's a way of executing, but also being aware of tools that can help you out. So when you have an anxious moment, you can write these things down. I do that, and I make sure that I'm aware of my thoughts, feelings, and how I can respond to them in a rational manner. So I'm very excited about the subject matter. I hope you are too, and I hope you get something out of it. Increasing resiliency can mean different things to different people, but I would also emphasize that resilience is not always the same feature and capabilities that we might have had in the past. Perhaps we've had very little and we have more today. So increasing resilience doesn't mean that we always have a straight line. It's keeping steady and never letting things derail you. It's really about the ability to make sure that you are really increasing your resiliency in every situation possible. It's also keeping a very specific mind about how you move that forward. When I think about resiliency, it's not just one thing. It's not just a flip on the light switch. It's a learning capability that we build into ourselves, and we make sure that we look at things in the future and also implementing as we go through them. It's not that, oh wow, I just got through it, because sometimes when we go through things, we don't recall how we got there. But going through the moment, sometimes we think, wow, what can I do to make this a little more comfortable or more realistic to approach and address? So I think that's about keeping steady, and that's why I'm doing this video. I've not always had that straight 45-degree angle. No one has, actually. And everyone is subject to not having enough resiliency. I think we're all challenged with this, and it's different measures and methods we can look at to ourselves to bring this forward. This is for all organizational settings, for-profit, nonprofit, and individually. Now, this is something that's not taught in an organization. It's not even taught in school necessarily. Videos on resiliency that I've seen have been lacking a lot of things in terms of like, how do you get there? What does that look like? It doesn't tell you a path point of how you can actually move forward on this. So I think there's different learnings in here that I think can help out. Now, it's not just more than a Jerome Kern song at all. That's not just picking yourself up and starting all over again. It's a little bit more than that, because we have a mental framework of, say, this staircase. So when we see a staircase like this is what we expect and think life is like, just putting one foot, metaphorically speaking, in front of the other to get to the next stage, get to the next level. And instead, life can show us some very difficult things. We can be swirled in things. And what I mean by swirl, I think this is really an important feature, because sometimes, I'm thinking maybe in a fear-based mode about a challenge that I have. And perhaps I'm just swirling in that particular moment, in that mode, and I'm not getting anything done. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm giving up a lot of my energy and time, and I'm not getting anything accomplished. So we get to this chaotic rope where things are, instead of being a straight line, they're a very jumbled mess. And that mess represents, again, a metaphor of how we find ourselves sometimes and how we find difficulty in the moments that we are in. We can look at challenges in the past and say, oh, we got through it. But we didn't actually write down or think about how we got through it. We just got through it. But there's also the opportunity to remember, how did I get to that stage, to that point, positivity, looking that through and using that tool set, if you will, to making sure I can look at future challenges in the same way. Again, this is a metaphor, a really nice even staircase. There's yellow lines, so there's some safety features here. There's a handrail, and each of the stairs seems to be very level and just nicely laid in front of each other. So how does this flow help us to get to the next stage? And this is where we often get caught. We think that life is always going to be like this. Instead, it can look like this. This is another metaphor. How do we get through this staircase? How do we actually get from one foot in front of the other to getting up to that staircase, getting to the very top? And so this is a challenge, a metaphor. Resiliency is the ability to bounce back from adversity, removing or not letting fear overwhelm, overcoming disappointment, and not accepting defeat. To me, one of the strongest words I see here, and I did bold this, is bounce back. I think that the bounce back is not necessarily guaranteed. It's not easy to do, and it's something that takes an inner courage, strength, and experience for us to acquire, and to not only just acquire and to use that time and again to remember those points that got us to the bounce back state. So this is something that's very important. I see this as a feature that we use every single day of our lives. The grit is a positive attribute based on an individual's reservoir of perseverance with a goal of a future state to be realized. So I have this grit to get through my doctoral thesis. I have a grit to making sure I can be certified by year's end. So this is another way of thinking about grit. It's really looking at that future state, a gold state. So there are significant features, and I did mention things like the rebounding or the bounce back. I think that's really one of the top features I think about, and it's one where it's something that I think about. How can I, in a given situation, rebound or bounce back when perhaps it was a negative comment from a manager or perhaps a coworker? How do I get through that? And how do I bounce back? Bouncing back is not a natural thing for almost anyone. So grit means I am determined to get through a particular situation. I'm determined to not become overwhelmed in this given scenario. I love the word courage, coming from the French word, and so coeur meaning heart. Courage is difficult in terms of how we think about this. How do we move and move with courage? How do we acquire courage? And how does that courage take action in place and take hold in our lives? So often people who are implementing and using courage would probably say they did so, but they didn't know exactly how they got there. They just saw maybe a light at the end of the tunnel and just kept moving forward with that. Or perhaps there was a sense of urgency. They felt the need to have that sense of courage in order to get themselves and maybe a family member through. Experience is important because it talks about how in the past we've gotten through specific issues, challenges, and I think experience is one way we can think about improving our experience and rebounding, that we remember the resiliency and the way we got there in the first place, and we use that in every given situation in the future. So it's about connection, social, familial, making sure the connections are these connections that you have with individuals to talk about things, and maybe learn from those individuals that we know in our lives that have had a similar situation and have made it through, have found a sense of resiliency. That can prop up our resiliency as well. Number 6, the final component, in my opinion, is confidence. Once we create a platform at some level of resiliency, we have one set of resiliency characterization that can help us in a given situation, perhaps an anxious state, a moment of fear, perhaps us getting through things that we didn't think we could get through. It's really looking back at past experiences, but also having a growth mindset that I'm going to get through. Confidence begets confidence. The anxious state has a life of its own, unfortunately, and this is one that can challenge our particular capabilities of coping as well as creating a sense of resiliency. So these things are, and I bring this out because I have to remind myself of this as well, because I can hear myself maybe say these words in the past. But when I'm saying them or going through them, I'm realizing that perhaps I am in an anxious state. And how do I work through that? By being aware that I can take some actions to really think about it differently. So those experiences that are the most negative or worrisome sometimes take a life of their own. Overestimation of threat risk. A lot of people definitely go through this, the belief that something bad is likely to happen than it really is. So catastrophizing situations. A belief that our experience will go from not so good to a disaster is something that some of us can go through. I've gone through that. Then I know that I'm really in an anxious state, and I know that I need to pull back. And I know that I need to use a rational way of bringing this back into focus. So there are some negative thoughts and imagery that we all come to, and that is jumping to negative conclusions. You can use this in terms of maybe your journaling, and you can look at the negative words you might use or negative thoughts you have about yourself or your abilities. maybe that's not exactly what it is. Maybe it is not so negative. Maybe it's positive. Maybe I should look at a positive way of looking at a certain issue or concern. Paralyzing fear. This is what keeps us from getting to a state of solution. This is also keeping us from, we spend way too much energy and inability to, say, concentrate, sleep, focus, eat, whatever it might be, because we're so worried and paralyzed by a particular fear, to making sure we can deal with the fear that we have before us at this given moment. So when you're aware of these, I think you're more able to codify them, bring them together. There are unhelpful ways to be more resilient. You hear this from individuals, and these are just the nice terms I've heard. You need a thick skin, be more positive, just do it, be assertive, you worry too much, get over it. Well, all of these really aren't very helpful. I'm not sure, by someone saying, I need a thick skin, how am I going to get that thick skin? And there's really no solution path of getting there. So think differently, and also be willing to not accept these as a solution that you need to move forward. So resilience is never mastered or perfected. It is always a practice. It is something that I'm practicing to do so that my next set of challenges will be able to be addressed much more effectively. Resiliency does not work the same way in every situation or condition. So as I mentioned previously, you may have been mastering certain things and using resiliency to get through it, and you don't even recognize the resiliency factors that went into that particular way of dealing with that, which is in a way unfortunate, because if you could, and perhaps maybe in a journal you've written down how you got through that, this is one way to think about how you can deal with your current challenges. It is one of the hardest things we can do because we are challenged constantly every single day of our lives. Secondly, hourly and daily, and all these things come to us while we are challenged. It is not something we can't get through. It's something that to be aware of is that our resiliency is always being challenged in a way that we can actually be aware of it. And being aware of it, we can create a solution for that, or at least be in a better mindset of being able to address those challenges. Our resiliency does not look the same in any given moment. Our state of resiliency is always in flux. The coping mechanisms are several, and these can also help out in terms of other tips that I do have and that I implement and use over time to think about those challenges. So some of those are just getting sleep. Sleep hygiene is really important, and it seems to be easier said than done. Sometimes when we're in a state of anxiety, we're not getting enough sleep. When we don't get enough sleep, we're not really our best selves and best physically and mentally able to handle those situations. And sometimes when we are in our anxious state, we get less food. We're getting less nutrition, social support, asking our family and friends for help, and even just an ear to listen to. Sometimes, and perhaps you've noticed this, if you talk to somebody about maybe a state of fear that you're in or concern, I've often felt better when I've talked about a situation that seemed, difficult or impossible or unpleasant. And my network has been there. I've had so many innovations that have come to my attention. Learning. So I use my personal journal to write things down. I can look at the past and see, wow, I didn't realize I was thinking those things way back when. I think my journal is really important. So I always have my journal with me, and my journal is something that I think is highly important to have because I talk about things and things that I've gone through. And maybe I don't know, it's a learning or teaching moment at the time. So I think to me, it's an opportunity for me to implement, utilize, learn, and rediscover those things. Cognitive skills, the ability to ask those questions in a way that can frame those particular concerns and perhaps even question them. Spiritual connectedness. This doesn't mean religion. It just means that you have a sense of things working out. I do specifically look at, say, Byron Katie's The Work. And, this is something you can download. It's free. I think it's in about 30 different languages. The work of Byron Katie is, I think, really essential for me. So in a book called Loving What Is, she states, is to help elevate the suffering caused by believing our stressful thoughts. Her 4 questions are golden and essential. And I think without her work, the work, we wouldn't have these 4 questions to ask ourselves, or at least in the same way. So she says in the 4 questions, the first one is, very iconic. Is it true? Do you know a particular situation or stressor that is absolutely true? Do you know that what you're thinking about, those negative thoughts, are actually true? Number 2 is, can you absolutely know that it's true? I think to me, when I read that, it's actually helping me to question my original thought, about my concern or my fear. And so maybe I would have to say no. I do not know with 100% certainty that something is actually 100% true. And number 3 is, how do you react when you believe that thought? And sometimes if it's a negative thought or a fear, well, you feel terrible, you feel helpless, you feel hopeless. And number 4 is, what would you be without that thought? If I didn't have a fear about a particular item or concern or worry, then I'd feel better. I'd feel good. I'd have a different outlook. So the 4 questions definitely I utilize in any given situation that I have where I'm trying to build and reinforce that resiliency. And additional perspectives, such as identifying negative thought. These are very similar to the work, the 4 questions. Evaluate the validity of the negative thought. Is it really true? Replace a negative thought with a useful one. So that's slightly different than Byron Katie's position, but it's not necessarily, doesn't negate anything she's doing. If I'm thinking negatively about something and I use the contra, I go on the other side of it and go to the positive. Might I feel better about my situation? Look toward repeating positive or affirming thoughts. I've done that myself where I've actually done the opposite. I've reaffirmed with negative thoughts. And where does that get me? It gets me to a very, I would say, depressed state. It makes me feel terrible. But when I think about things differently, yes, I can get through that. I've done this before in the past, or I've done something similar to this in the past. I've gotten through these difficult moments. And when you remind yourself, you feel better about that. Record your thoughts in writing. It shows a better memory recall. And I think that's something that I've done for a long time. If I just think about something, then I don't really solve the situation, or at least examine the situation. It tends to keep coming back and again. Additionally, writing down can help you anchor where you are today. Your thoughts and concerns are really important, and they can actually help you to move forward in the future. So lastly, becoming resilient is continuous learning. This is something that I've echoed previously in this conversation. Learning is not automatic. It is not acquiring a skill and method to help us develop and cope for further resiliency. We can look at our challenges in the past and see how that might guide us in our current challenge. When we find we are headed to a negative position, we can look to changing that by simply being aware of it, right? So if I know, wow, James, that sounds really negative, maybe I can position this differently. Let me take a negative thought and position this towards the positive, a positive solution, a capability of changing. We are more empowered than if we have no tools to maintain and continue to develop our resiliency. This is truly a life learning situation, and one that we can do together. So this is an important icon. It shows this individual raising their hand because they've accomplished something. They're on an upward trajectory. The steps show incremental or capable improvement over time. And this is what I like to think about resiliency in my own life. Resiliency culture in an organization or an individual can help us out. If your organization has a health and well-being function, then definitely bring up a resiliency topic. This can really help you to get through, and your teammates to get through difficult moments. It's also a way to think about that this is a teaching moment. When we become aware of something, we're able to address it. We're able to think about things differently as opposed to spinning around in circles, not making any progress, not making any learnings from the difficulties we've gone through. Perhaps this presentation will help you think of ways of maintaining your resiliency, increasing that over time, helping others to get to a resiliency step, just like this individual here. Thank you very much for watching. More topics to come in James All About Business. I do appreciate it. Share this video with someone who might be interested in this topic. I will see you very soon. Thank you again.